Lebanon's economic and financial crisis could rank as one of the three most severe the world has seen since the mid-19th century. The public are accusing Lebanon's authorities of deliberately failing to mount an adequate policy response to the country's worsening economic and financial crisis. Lebanon's descent into what could end up being one of the top three worst crises in 150 years has been stunningly swift. The country's gross domestic product GDP, which measures the total output of goods and services, nosedived from close to $55 billion in 2018 to an estimated $33 billion last year, as per the latest Lebanon Economic Monitor released by the World Bank last week. The inaction by Lebanese authorities is not due to lack of knowledge or quality advice, but rather the failure to agree on effective policy initiatives and a political consensus that defends a bankrupt economic system, which, by the way, benefited a few for so long. The crisis has caused a grave social fallout that has pushed more than half of the population below the poverty line. The decimated purchasing power of the Lebanese pound has led to more than 40% of households reporting challenges in accessing food and other basic needs. Meanwhile, the nation's unemployment rate spiked from 28% in February 2020 to nearly 40% by the end of the same year. Such dire socioeconomic conditions risk systematic national fallings with regional and potentially global consequences. Propelled by popular desperation and anger, impulsive protests now mark the advent of a longer period of unrest, chaos, and even a social explosion across the country as conditions continue to deteriorate. Lebanon is suffering from poor governance and a gaping lack of public accountability. To date, the country's three overlapping crises, a financial meltdown, the catastrophic Beirut port explosion, and the COVID-19 pandemic, have not been met with an effective government response. On the contrary, years of government corruption and incompetence laid the ground for Lebanon's accelerating collapse. Many observers have become habituated to Lebanon's dysfunction and perpetual sense of crisis. But Lebanon's current predicament marks a real departure from the past. Even in the worst days of the civil war, while lacking a government, Lebanese found informal ways to keep the country somewhat functioning. This time, it's a different Lebanon. Welcome to the Mideastream. I'm Marwa Osman. Crisis hit Lebanon over the weekend, teetered on the verge of complete chaos driven by the Lebanese pound's dramatic nosedive against the dollar that sent agitated Lebanese to the streets across the country, blocking highways with burning tires in Beirut and other areas, and attacking public utilities to protest the deteriorating economic conditions. Now, this coincided with the breakdown of public services that has left the country in total darkness, and with closed gas stations as a result of severe fuel, gasoline, and diesel shortages that have threatened to bring a complete halt to private generators on which the majority of the Lebanese public and businesses, including hospitals, depend for electricity. Now, to discuss this issue with us from Beirut is Dr. Mohsen Saleh, political commentator. Thank you for being with us, Dr. Saleh. Now, the collapsing Lebanese pound, which sank to a record low for the first time in Lebanon's history, trading at almost 18,000 Lebanese lira to the US dollar on the black market, coincided with the breakdown of the public services, as we just said, especially electricity, because there is no fuel to power the generators. No securing basic public services by any authority is like basically saying, we want chaos, go ahead and bring about the chaos to the country. Who benefits from all of this in Lebanon right now?
Hi to you, thank you for having me. As we know, everybody knows in Lebanon, and most probably the Europeans, who really were the patronizing of the Lebanese political situation from the 90s with Rafiq Hariri, the martyr of Lebanon. And we know the situation in Lebanon is very miserable. It's going to abyss, and nobody would really have a kind of relief for what's going on. There are some thieves in Lebanon, especially in the political class, with their manager of this partnership between the capitalists, the bank owners, and some of the mafias of the sects in Lebanon who are leading this country into this abyss. I'm not surprised of this collapse of the Lebanese pound. I'm really anxious about the future of Lebanon after this very critical situation. The situation is not only economic situation, it's a political situation. The Americans and the Europeans, especially the French, now talking about a new mandate for Lebanon because of the political change in the region. Now we have many choices probably. First of all, we have to get rid, to reconstruct Lebanon, to get rid of all these mafias and the bank owners and this system, this capitalist or this new liberal system. Would the Americans agree? Of course not. They are not eager to see solutions in Lebanon. They are not eager to see Lebanese are satisfied with their authorities. There are no actual authorities to authorize good things or to lead the state into a safe place. Actually, I really hesitant to say that all these people who are the solution in their hand are the thieves of the money of the country.
Dr.
While billions.
Saleh, this brings us to that worse still. Lebanon was quickly sliding into political abyss, into risk of instability, into social unrest. The top leaders even failed to agree on forming a cabinet, a new government, to at least rescue what's left in the country's economy. Can you explain to us the dilemma that led to this state of political deadlock in Lebanon?
Well, really, people, the Lebanese people, they have unveiled all these ambiguities in the Lebanese situation, and now they know that these people who are leading, or what so-called leaders in Lebanon, are not deserving this place or post or position because they have stolen all the money of the Lebanese. And that's why I guess the Lebanese have the right to raise their voice and go into demonstration or saying that we have no confidence, no trust whatsoever in this class. And the problem is that all these people were protected by the Americans and the French, and most of them, they have connections with the American embassy and with the Saudis. Now the Saudis raise their hand and say, well, we don't want Hariri, because they said they really said we have paid a lot of money for some of them. Well, most of them they counted from Jaja to Hariri and others. Well, not to say about other people, because these people are really leading the situation in Lebanon into this catastrophe, and of course they can't make or shape or form any new government that would lead to a solution in Lebanon and relieve people, because they are the problem. Because they are the problem.
How could it's being shaped otherwise in the media? How is it being shaped in the internal and also the foreign media? It's being shown that there is a dilemma, there is a problem, a bickering problem between the President On and the Premier designate Saad al-Hariri, who by the way has been designated since October 22, 2020. Now they are trading accusations. Each one is just pointing to the other being of blame, and one wants to form a cabinet of non-partisan specialists to enact reforms and salvage the country from an all-out economic collapse, while the other seemingly wants to secure what is called in the media the Christian rights. What's the main reason for this statement?
The main reason.
If Hariri actually has internal and external support, then what does President On want?
Let's say it frankly, for once and for all. President Aoun came to the presidency in order to reform and make some ameliorations to the system, and he could not, because this mafia in these authorities in the state, they have prevented and blocked any kind of reformation because they have taken the money of the country. They have stolen the money of the country. How could they help General Aoun, President Aoun, in order to reform? That's the problem, I guess, because also with the political reasoning that would say General Aoun really stood by the resistance in Lebanon, and he did not do what the French and the Saudis want to do in Syria. All this, they are punishing these people, the environment, the abrasive environment of the resistance in Lebanon. And I guess this is a kind of conspiracy. Mm-hmm. What would they do in the future in order to solve the situation? Because their men are really the problem. Would they agree, the French, and they are putting now some sanctions on their men? Would that solve the situation? Well, I really don't know.
One more minute before we end off with this problem. One more minute in this segment, Dr. Saleh, but the pound has lost more than 90% of its value, and the basic items have skyrocketed in prices. Do you think that we are looking at the biggest social and economic catastrophe actually in West Asia, or is there still time to salvage something?
Well, we are in turmoil. I guess the Americans want to see this kind of turmoil in Lebanon and in Syria and in Iraq and other places, also in Yemen. They are really putting sanctions in order to these countries, to these states, to collapse.
It seems they are succeeding, though.
They are. I guess the peoples of the West Asian countries, they can rebuild and reconstruct these countries because they are the heritage of the Americans and the French. We have one choice only: to get rid of these peoples of between brackets, the Americans and the French and the Saudis, and without kicking out these people from the decision maker of in Lebanon and in other places in Iraq or in Yemen, the Hadi and his gangs. I guess without that we can't rebuild these countries and the region. And we are really peoples are trying, resisting all this kind of hegemony from the 20th century till now. Peoples are going in the right track.
Hopefully so. Thank you very much from Beirut, Dr. Mohsen Saleh, political commentator, for being with us to talk about the economic and social collapse in Lebanon. Please stay tuned. Next, we will be talking about Yemen. Now, the Yemeni armed forces announced earlier last week a military operation targeting Saudi forces, where days after the announcement, the Yemeni military media broadcasted scenes from the operation of the Yemeni armed forces targeting this camp of the Saudi coalition with dozens of Qasif 2K drones in the Al-Wadi'a border area. Now, spokesperson Brigadier General Yahya al-Sariya announced the killing of a number of Saudi officers and the killing of more than 60 fighters in the ranks of the Saudi coalition aggression. In this large-scale military operation, more in this following report. Clashes intensified during the past week between the Yemeni armed forces and forces loyal to the outgoing President Abdrabbuh Mansour Hadi within the Raghwan district, the second largest district of Ma'rib Governorate, which extends from northwest to west. This came in the wake of Hadi's forces violating a tribal truce signed in earlier March 2020 between Sana'a forces and some of the leaders of the Raghwan tribes, which stipulated the commitment of the army and popular committees not to attack the district's areas that had been neutralized from the ongoing confrontations. Under the agreement signed by the Marwan and the Shadawda tribes, the largest of the Raghwan tribes, which held for more than a year before Hadi forces violated it, Sana'a granted the people of the district the right to protect and manage their own security. However, the transformation of a number of areas of Raghwan district into a launching pad for the operations of Hadi forces and the Islah Party militias had little effect on the course of the confrontations on the western and southwestern fronts, where the skirmishes declined in the past 2 days. Meanwhile, the Yemeni armed forces were able to make new military progress west of the Khanjar camp, specifically in the Khub and Al-Shaga front of Al-Jawf Governorate. The military media center in Sana'a published audio and video documented scenes that showed the army and the popular committees in the area, in addition to showing scores of dead and injured Saudi mercenaries. In the meantime, the spokesman for the Yemeni Armed Forces, Brigadier General Yahya Sariya, confirmed that the drone air force was able to carry out a massive military operation targeting a training camp of the Saudi Emirati coalition in the Al Wadi'a area, with 10 Qasif 2K drones targeting the command center, training sites, and sectors. Sariya pointed out that the operation, which was documented by video and audio, led to the killing of a Saudi officer and 60 members of Saudi mercenaries, including a number of military leaders. According to military sources in Sana'a, the targeted camp is under the supervision of the Central Military Command in the region and enjoys high protection and advanced technological security via American satellites. Sariya made it clear that targeting Al Wadi'a camp was a message to Washington that will be followed by other messages during the upcoming period of fighting to liberate all of Ma'rib. Now, to discuss this issue with us from Sydney is author and academic Dr. Tim Anderson. Thank you very much for being with us, Dr. Anderson. Now, footage of the Yemeni Armed Forces media showed Yemeni Qasif 2K arriving at the scene inside the Al Wadi'a military camp, which is a very, very important camp on the border with Yemen, while Saudi soldiers and their mercenaries were fleeing. Whoever was left of them fled for their lives. Now, the Yemeni armed forces have been targeting Saudi military bases for a long time now. Why was this operation very significant for the Yemeni armed forces?
It's another step, really, in the Yemeni forces taking over parts of Najran, moving into area that has been disputed for a long time, but in any case, currently Saudi territory. So there's strong support they have also from some of the people there. So, and the use of the drones that you mentioned, as you said, has been used before against other Saudi military bases.
Well, during the same week, Yemeni army forces launched 2 missile strikes against the position of Saudi-led militants in Yemen's very strategic central province of Ma'rib, which is witnessing right now a huge operations. They killed and wounded dozens of those mercenaries. Many reason might be behind the choice to take the time to liberate Ma'rib, because it's been over 5 months now that the operation of Ma'rib had started. However, if you want to break down the situation in this major city which is bordering Saudi Arabia, why do you think that the Yemeni armed forces led by the resistance forces of Ansarullah are taking their time to liberate Ma'rib?
I don't think it's completely correct to say that they're taking their time. They've actually made a number of statements to say that we're going to, move very quickly, and they wanted to move very quickly. But as you say, it's an extremely heavy battle, and it's the biggest stakes in the north of Yemen, really, because this is the one base that the Hadi so-called government based in Riyadh has. In other words, everything that the Saudis have been doing has been trying to reinforce this one significant base on the ground, and if and when Ansarullah-led forces take Ma'rib, that is going to change the complexion in the entire region, basically. And as you say, there's been heavy battle. There's been a lot of airstrikes on the forces coming in from the west, and the Yemeni revolutionary government is using ballistic missiles also against their targets there. I've read that there's been thousands of casualties there. So I don't think their aim is to slow it down. In fact, they are making some moves in other parts of the country at the same time, but this is really the big battle in the north of Yemen.
Mm-hmm. Well, one very interesting thing happened last week was the breaking of an agreement that happened between the Yemeni armed forces and the biggest tribes of Maghreb, because the mercenaries of Saudi Arabia broke that agreement and started shooting from those specific areas after long talks happened between Ansarullah and these tribes, and they all agreed that they should not fight. Do you think that Mohammed bin Salman is now trying to maneuver something new to maybe bring new enemies for Ansarullah to the table?
Well, there's always the aim to try and divide and carve out sections of the country. I mean, you know, that Hadi himself was the one who was trying to move back to a 6-part partition of the country under Saudi direction. So they'll keep doing that. But I think there's a measure of desperation coming from Riyadh now, because they are losing on so many fronts. And the revolutionary government is making incursions into the south now at the same time. So they are fighting on more than one front.
Well, the Swedish foreign minister landed in Riyadh last week, where she met with Saudi foreign minister Faisal bin Farhan, and for God knows what reason, she met with Abdrabbu Mansour Hadi, the ousted Yemeni president. Now, she tweeted that the discussions were concerning the peace efforts in Yemen for bilateral issues and for humanitarian issues as well, and humanitarian rights. Now, Saudi Arabia is still bombing Yemen. It's blockading the country, aerial, sea, land blockades, and it's sending even more mercenaries to occupy the country. What peace efforts is she talking about?
Well, the problem is that there is a very bad Security Council resolution, I think it's 2216 from 2015, which frames the whole conflict as though what they call the Houthis are the problem, basically an outside problem, and somehow enshrines Hadi as legitimate president of Yemen. Now, Hadi had an interim role in 2012 through to 2014, but somehow this Security Council resolution from 2015 has enshrined forever the role of this exiled junta in Riyadh as the legitimate government. And so the language being used, and you see it in the Persian Gulf press and the Western press, the Yemeni government this, the Yemeni government that, they're talking about a regime, or not even a regime, but a group of people in Riyadh, basically, as the Yemeni government. So when other agents, including those, looking at the UN security resolution, come in, there's a very difficult structure there to deal with. And what the Ansarullah-led revolutionary government has said, that they'll agree to a ceasefire if the blockade is lifted, unfortunately is undermined by this very bad Security Council resolution from 6 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Well, Oman has been long perceived as a neutral party in the part of West Asia, and has spent the past few weeks attempting to get Saudi Arabia and Yemen to the negotiating table to find an end to the ongoing suffering of the Yemeni people. Now, the Yemeni conditions for any ceasefire, just like you just mentioned, are fixed. They are not negotiable. Ansarullah said it clearly by the movement's leader, Sayyid Abdul Malik al-Houthi. He said, lift the siege, halt all forms of aggression, just stop bombing the same place hundreds of times, and end the occupation. I think that these are reasonable. Even if I want to stand by the Yemenis, if I want to take a different position and be objective about it, they seem very logical conditions there. What is the next move for Yemen in the event that Mohammed bin Salman just chooses to move forward with the aggression instead of accepting the reality and just giving up on his psychopathic warmongering policies?
It's very difficult. He's in a very difficult situation. Let's say the Saudi rulers are in a very difficult situation because they are losing on several fronts. They're having their own territory, incursions into what they consider their own territory, as well as about to lose Marib, which is going to be a very big blow to them. And of course, the Emirates and Israel are in the south, and there's some some movement going on there, let's say, in favour of the revolutionary government. So the Saudis have been suing for peace for some time because they know that they're losing, but they're hanging on to those shreds of so-called legitimacy that the UN gives them, and that their Western backers are hanging on to, really. So, but nevertheless, the Saudis know that they're losing. They've gone to Iran, they've gone to Oman. They're doing talks. They're looking for peace. And in the meantime, as you say, the revolutionary government has put a very reasonable position. And while that's not met, They are simply going ahead with what they're going ahead with, and they're making more progress, basically. And this is, the problem is the legitimacy battle going on internationally is going to try and sheet home responsibility to, their favoured party. And so that's the dilemma in terms of the international debate.
Well, it seems that we are looking ahead to very decisive weeks ahead in liberating Ma'rib and see where things go for the action negotiations to move forward. I want to thank you very much, Dr. Tim Anderson, author and academic, for joining us from Sydney to talk about the latest developments in Yemen. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for watching. And please stay tuned next week for more from the Mideastream.